Good morning, members of the Apollo Beach Community Forest Garden.
We are in front of our 3-bay composting system, and we're finally fixing the struts. We think we figured out how they have to go, but we wanted to make a quick reminder on how the system actually works, because we found it in a state that will not actually help us achieve really nice composted and degraded down materials. So we just want to do a little recap on how the system actually works. This is our bin number 1 over here. We're also thinking of putting probably a number 1, number 2, and number 3 so that everyone knows this, but it was agreed in the beginning, because the access here is very easy, that this is our bin number 1.
There's our access right through here.
And the reason that is important, why the access is important, is because in reality the only bin that everyone or anyone is ever going to use is bin number 1, because that's where you put your fresh scraps or your vegetables that got blemished or any sort of material that you want to compost. It is ideal that we don't put such large items into this compost system, because it's not big enough to hold big branches and actually help us degrade those. We don't have such an intensive composting system that those materials will actually degrade. So for example, these pigeon pea stems, the leaves are great, but the stems are probably never going to fully decompose, especially if they are cut in larger pieces.
So for those stems that are larger in those pieces, that's what our banana circle is used for.
Exactly, that's what the banana circle over there is. All the bananas will feed on all these larger stems, larger pieces. I also found some old aloe plants. If you don't want the aloe plants, that's totally fine. They can go in the banana circle composting system. That's why we have several composting systems in the garden for each individual case, what works best. However, what's great are eggshells, newspaper, food scraps. I found some old okras, fruit here, and so on and so forth. But things like these roots will never decompose properly in this system. Aside from that, what we also noticed is the system is very dry. So without humidity, things cannot compost properly. So in the drier months and in the drier seasons, even though we're in June right now, it hasn't been raining consistently, this compost system needs to be irrigated. So when you add materials, you also need to add some water. There's a hose right over there, and there's also a spigot right over here.
Spigot right here we can get a hose on.
There can be a hose. There's also hoses on these beds. So that's important. So the only bin that you're ever going to use to put fresh scraps of any sort is bin number 1. Once bin number 1 is full, the contents of bin number 1 are transferred into bin number 2. And you start the whole process over again. Because you emptied the contents of bin number 1 into bin number 2, so bin number 1 is empty. So then you start putting all your fresh scraps again into bin number 1 together with newspaper and leaves in a balanced manner.
But unfortunately, what's happened here in bin number 2 is because bin number 1 was full, we started shoving items in bin number 2 that aren't actually ready yet to have already composted some. So instead, this is slower, and it's not going to break down as if it had the time to be in bin number 1, start breaking down, bin number 1 get full, add to bin number 2, and come over here, and then eventually it gets in bin number 3.
All right, so to recap again, you put all your scraps in bin number 1. When bin number 1 gets full, its contents get transferred into bin number 2, and then you start filling bin number 1 again. When bin number 1 gets full for the second time, you first transfer the contents of bin number 2 into bin number 3, and then you transfer the contents of bin number 1 into bin number 2, and then you start filling bin number 1 for the third time, and put all the scraps and newspaper and leaves, always maintaining a balanced ratio of greens and browns, as we know is important for compost. And you fill this bin again, and once this one is full, the bin number 1 is full for the third time, then bin number 3 should be ready and nice and fully degraded very nice compost. This process can take anywhere between 4 and 6 months, depending on the accurate maintenance that this is given and depending on the climatic conditions as well. But the optimal would be that every 4 months we have a bin full of delicious compost ready to use. This is pretty good because it's the lower, but you can see and listen how dry this is. That means that the microorganisms in here are not really thriving, because in dry conditions microorganisms can't thrive, and that's why this hasn't degraded any further. It's mummified. It needs humidity to keep decomposing. So we just wanted to remind you how these bins are used so that we start improving this process and we can obtain a better material here at the end. So once you end up with this nice and rich compost that you harvest from here, you again transfer the contents from number 2 into number 3, from number 1 into number 2, and the whole process starts all over again. And you start filling bin number 1 again. So you will never put any fresh scraps into bin number 2 or bin number 3. The only place where fresh scraps and newspaper and leaves go into is bin number 1. Bin number 2 and bin number 3 are only for the purpose of further degrading what was in bin number 1. And that is how a 3-bay composting system works. And you can do this in many scales. This can be on a farm scale. Maybe these bins would be 20 by 20 feet large and they would be turned with a tractor. In a small garden or home garden, this is a perfect size of a bin, of a 3-way composting bin. So yeah, that's the recap, and we hope this helps so that we can all together start improving the process of making this compost. Okay, so we fixed the struts, put them in properly, and the lid works now very well. So it is important also to know that to manage the humidity inside the bin, like we were talking before, during the drier months, the bin usually should stay open, fully open, all the time, no matter that no one is here. So it should stay like this. It opens very easily, effortless. And the reason it should stay open is because in case it rains, it will help us add humidity to the compost system. In the peak of the rainy season, probably, hopefully, this month of July and August and a little bit of September, it is preferred that the bin stays closed. We are in Florida, so the amount of water can be so much that it can actually cause rotting in the bin instead of controlled decomposition. If there's too much water, oxygen deprived environment is created, and that produces bad smells, it produces rotting, and things won't properly degrade. So as long as we don't have consistent rains, this can stay fully open. It also makes using the bin much easier. And then once we get consistent rains, whomever comes by can keep it closed. So this is fixed. To close it, you can use the handle or you can hold on to the roof. The roof sometimes gets a little bit hot. So if we use the handle, pull it down, clip it on this side, and then clip it on that side. And it's done. All right. These struts are very powerful. So if we don't clip it, the lid pops back open on its own. I'm gonna open it up because I want to show you one last thing. I have been removing these contents of bin number 3 because I want to fix what happened kind of in these bins. And to do that, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna empty bin number 3 and I'm gonna switch these 2 bins into the consecutive bins. So I've been removing a lot of this unfinished, very dry compost, and I found several pieces of trash, and I just want to remind everyone as well to be careful of what goes in the compost bin. I found
irrigation stub,
hose head. I found that tomato clip. If you throw your tomatoes in here, make sure you remove all the clips. A glove. There's also pieces of candy wrappers and so on and so forth. So please do pay good attention to what goes in here. There were also some water bottle caps and so on and so forth. So we want to obviously try to avoid those kinds of things that cannot be broken down properly in a 3-bay compost system. So I think that's it.
And one thing I will say, when you are opening the bin, don't just unclip it and let it fly open. Use your hand on the handle to just gently kind of pull it up.
Guide it up,
And
yeah.
by doing that, it's just going to help it go, because the struts are very, very powerful.
All right,
All right, thank you so much.
thank you.